and welcome to Media 7 in front of a live audience at Auckland's Classic Comedy Club. In this week's show, we'll look at science and technology in the media, a grim anniversary and some lads with cars. But first, it's the economy. How bad is the news? Stimulus. Everyone's got one.
Government is the difference between a bad recession and a very bad depression.
As the global economy nosedives, governments are pumping new money into their economies to stave off crisis. Or are they?
Deficit hawks on Capitol Hill and some conservative economists say continuing to throw money at the economic meltdown will only make it worse.
When New Zealand's government announced its own stimulating stimulus, the spending was news. But was it really new? No, said pundits Tim Watkin. It's almost entirely composed of spending authorised by the last government, back in the halcyon days of 2008. What he said David Cunliffe in the House.
What proportion of the funding announced for the now famous Korpu Bridge yesterday is actually new money?
No way, said Bill English.
Well, if we counted as new money projects which now have funding, which were announced by Labor with that...
Point of order, the Honourable David. Point of order, Mr.
Then pretty well everything we're doing is new money.
Shouldn't there be someone sorting this out?
Point of order, the Honourable David. Point of order, Mr.
Meanwhile, Fisher and Paykel's shares nosedived on the profit warning, then rebounded after the Prime Minister said, apparently off the cuff, that the government could bail it out. And while you're waiting, here are some boot camps to take your eye off the economy. Never mind the boot camps, who can tell us when we'll be living in tent cities? Joining us to discuss the media and the economic crisis are Bernard Hickey of interest.co.nz, New Zealand Herald business editor Liam Dan, and Tim Watkin of pundit.co.nz. Welcome to you all. Bernard, it has been said that the New Zealand news this year doesn't have quite the tone of crisis that it does, say, in Britain. Is that because we're not as badly off as they are, or because we're in denial?
Actually, it's both. We aren't as bad off as in the UK or the US. Our financial systems aren't in crisis mode like they are there. But it's true, we haven't really been watching closely enough what's been happening overseas, and it will come to affect us in our interest rates, in our economy, and we're seeing that now with the likes of Fonterra's big payout warning and also the Fisher and Paykel Appliances warning. It will hit us, and we need to prepare for that. But it's not quite as dire as we're seeing in the likes of Ireland and Britain and Spain, where unemployment looks like heading towards 20% pretty quickly. It's nowhere near that here.
20% is astonishing, isn't it?
Yes, in Spain in particular and Ireland, it's going to move there very quickly. And one of the untold stories here is the likely pressures on the euro and the potential for Ireland to default on its debts.
And the irony there is that we've been told for years to look at Ireland as an economic success story, the Irish tiger. What happened?
Or Iceland, yeah.
Or Iceland, yeah.
That's right, yes. I mean,
Iceland's gone bankrupt.
That's right. There's the joke around at the moment, what's the difference between Iceland and Ireland? It's just one letter in 6 months. It really is that serious for Ireland, and New Zealand should know about this and care about it. We should be reading about it a lot more. Just to be ready when it comes. It may not come in the same intensity, but it will come.
Now, you've been playing a role as a media Cassandra. I expect that you didn't expect it to be quite as bad as it is now.
Not the scale of the crisis and the sort of things that have gone on. And for example, September last year, the global financial system was 3 hours away from a complete meltdown, according to the Treasury and the Federal Reserve in the US. At various points, we've had the world's biggest banks nearly at the point of collapse. We're going to see the biggest banks in the United States and in the UK nationalised. No one would have thought about this 6-12 months ago, but it is going to happen. But in terms of what's actually happening on the ground, it isn't actually worse than I expected, although I was pretty grumpy 6-12 months ago. And it's interesting, now when I talk to people, for example, real estate agents who hated my guts about a year ago, talk to them now and they think, well, we are going to see a 30% fall in house prices, and we hope people do actually hear this message so that they can adjust their thinking on what to sell for, and we actually get some volume through the market.
One of the issues is that it's quite sexy, a Wall Street meltdown. It's quite an interesting story. I mean, you can watch it from afar, and it's like it's like watching an international war or something. It's an amazing thing, and you feel like you're buffered because we don't have a financial industry here of any note. I mean, we don't have an economy built on bankers and things like that. So that's imploded, and that's incredibly shocking to places like New York and London, and that's why the news out of there is so extreme. In New Zealand, our boring industries are looking quite sort of like the new sexy at the moment, and that's helping, you know. But you know, we're starting to see a second phase of news flow through, and it's not quite as sexy and fun.
Because up till now we haven't had, say, even what Australia's had, the big BHP redundancies. Yeah. But this week,
maybe,
you know,
yeah, we're feeling
the other shoe dropped
actually,
with Fisher and
weeks,
Paykel,
yeah.
which you
Yep.
covered. John Key was very quick to indicate that the government might be prepared to step in and bail out Fisher and Paykel if necessary. Does he need to be careful about saying those things off the cuff?
Yeah, he does. It's a difficult position because he probably feels in his heart that he doesn't want to see, you know, like a lot of New Zealanders, it's a period of time. This is a good business with good brands and good market position. It's got a pretty crappy finance company probably, you know, like that they need to deal with. It's not terrible, but by New Zealand standards. But the part of the business that's involved in exporting whiteware is a good business. But you know, their timing's been terrible around shifting things offshore, and you know, this is a company that pulls at the heartstrings of people who love New Zealand business because it's a brand. It's the biggest New Zealand manufacturing success story. So nobody wants to see it go because of something that's outside of our control, and maybe there is something for the government there. But you know, if they don't, if you suggest that the government might bail something out, then there's an issue with the shareholders and potential buyers standing back and going, oh well, you know.
Do you think it was off the cuff? I mean, that's an interesting question because there seemed to be a certain amount of thinking involved in terms of the government being able to send a signal that there is a bottom somewhere, that we'll let things only go so too far.
Because it was said to journalists, so it was going to be communicated.
Yeah.
But the thing is, and this is one of the interesting features now of the John Key leadership, you're starting to see some of his tactical rather than strategic way of doing things, which is frankly a concern. I want my Prime Minister to say no sometimes. He says yes a lot, and from the point of view of a bit of a dry, I'd like him to say no when people jump up and ask for my money, taxpayers' money more often, because as soon as he says, well, maybe on Fisher and Paykel it has to be iconic and a national treasure, everyone's going to exactly. Everyone's going to jump up and say,
"We keep icons
I'm a national treasure.
in our washing rooms and our kitchens. We keep these giant totems to this company."
Now, of course, there's also an expectation for our government to follow what the governments around the world seem to be doing and pumping money into the economy. It appeared that's what had happened with the national government stimulus package. But Tim, you looked at that stimulus package and it came to the conclusion there was virtually nothing new in there.
Yeah, I mean, the government has made a lot, especially basically since the middle of December, shortly after they came into power. They talked about the rolling malls. They talked about a $9 billion stimulus package that was in the top 3 in the world. There was a lot of self-praise about how active we are being. This was the
message in the media.
This was the message. That exactly was. We're responding. We're taking the lead. We're looking out for you. Truth is about that package that more than half of it is money that was allocated by Labor in the 2008 budget. That is May 2008. Now we're talking 9 months ago, when New Zealand had a small local recession, but well before we had the Lehman Brothers, the awful September, and everything started to head horribly south towards the end of last year. So what I was looking into was trying to figure out what's actually in this budget, what isn't. When you find out that things like Kiwi Rail, which this government strongly opposed in opposition, is actually now $700 million of a $9 billion package.
That, isn't it? Yeah.
You've got to wonder whether they're being exactly as upfront as they should be about how forward-thinking and how active they're being. Now, if they want to say publicly, we are taking a conservative route, where Australia is bringing in new spending, where Japan is bringing in new spending, where the US is bringing in new spending, we don't want to go that way. If that's their policy, then tell us that.
Well, they have. If you have a look at John Key's speech, he made a point, and Bill English has done the same, of saying we do have to be more conservative, partly because we've already injected as much into our economy as others. And you're right, they are dressing it up. They are putting a lipstick on this particular pig because they know the public wants someone to do something. That's what politicians do in a crisis, they do something. When actually sometimes the best thing is to do nothing.
But the risk of that is that there's nothing recession specific in what we're spending now. What we're stuck with tax cuts that are almost a year old. We're stuck with spending plans that aren't responding to this particular moment. They're responding to a moment that is now months and months old.
And people are reading about Obama doing this, and they're reading about Kevin Rudd doing this over the Tasman.
But you've got to play the recession in front of you. You've got to play the recession in front of you, and you know, if there was any doubt, and I haven't seen this in a lot of the commentary out of Wellington or whatever, but you know, and English and Key should have known this, but S&P came out a month or so ago, this is the ratings agency, and reminded us that if we did borrow a lot more money, they might downgrade our rating. Now that to the rest of the world, when New Zealand businesses are in the trouble that they're in, and the banks looking at us saying no already is really bad news. You could see a lot more damage done through a ratings downgrade, and to their credit, I think Key and English know that, you know, so some prudence. I guess
this is an area where they have to be careful what they say. Is there also, particularly amongst financial journalists, a feeling now that the people reporting it have to be careful what they say? No one wants to be the journalist who starts to run on the bank.
There's a little bit of a war footing. You know, you feel like you're in something that's a bit, you know, look, we think about it all the time. Honestly, we're still driven by, you know, some intellectual honesty and the idea that journalism is about breaking stories, obviously. But, you know, for example, there's a list apparently that Treasury has of companies that they may need to bail out. That's what I've read. Now,
which would be a hell of a story.
A hell of a list. But what if you've got someone who's working there like a dog 24 hours a day to get through this crisis, and they're just about there, they might be going to get there. You come out with a story saying, you know, they're on the list or whatever, and they're gone now.
But isn't this the thinking that meant we didn't report on the finance company collapses before they happened? We all worried that we might push that one over the edge, when actually we should have been out there hard and fast arguing this company doesn't have the support of its bankers, this company has a reinvestment rate that's low, mums and dads should be careful about this.
Well, we should be telling people who to be careful of. We should be telling people about the company's debt position, but it's just when you get into speculation, that's what I'm talking about, I guess. If you're speculating about, and we don't know how bad things are, you know, there's a lot of names floating around right now, and sometimes just what happens on the market will tell us.
You're right, but then if you were able to get hold of that list, surely the onus would be on you then to go and try and prop it up and see whether actually the numbers actually did equate, because that's the concern, is that journalists, you know, political journalists always know more about politicians than they tell. Financial journalists at this point, if they know more than they're telling, then are actually potentially skewing the market in one way or the other. And, you know, I think there is a certain obligation. I mean, I understand Liam's cautious approach. He's got a responsibility to, you know, his newspaper, to his readers, to make sure that the facts are straight.
To the people who work for those companies and the people who hold shares in them. And, you know, obviously we went big on Fisher and Paykel, and in a way I think generally the market didn't pick up on that, not because they were trying to hold back, to be honest, but because no one had quite remembered that they had you know, the whole restructuring debt issue just didn't get picked up. I mean, I don't think there was any sense that anyone was holding back on Fisher and Paykel.
But let's say you guys do communicate fully the magnitude of the crisis that we're going through to your readers. What difference does it make to them? What can they do about it? I mean, it's not like the finance companies, is it?
Well, you could argue that if everyone suddenly became depressed, then they would spend less, and that would have an effect on the economy. And
which we've been seeing, haven't we?
Yes, and there was
saving more.
There was a warning from the Reserve Bank governor a few weeks ago to say, let's not pull down the shutters, let's keep spending. And he was right to do that.
Yeah, fear and panic is never, you know, or particularly panic, doesn't matter how bad things get, you know, that's never a good thing. So you don't want to, you know, engender panic, obviously.
But isn't that a test of our communication skills then, as journalists, to actually, because, you know...
You search for the tone.
Equally as bad would be in 6 months' time our readers saying, but you didn't tell us that Ukraine was about to fall over,
there's
and
two
that
places
Poland
to look,
is screwed.
you know, I mean, if you look in the business pages every day, it's there. I mean, it's pretty bloody grim, to be honest. So it's difficult to keep hammering on about, you know, in that way to the readers of the business pages, because they're reading it every day anyway. The difficulty, I think, actually is getting out to a bunch of ordinary New Zealanders who maybe, you know, just don't see it around them. You know, if you're a teacher in Christchurch or something, and you're reading this stuff and seeing it, and you're just going out and going, well, what's happening?
And that's what we were trying to do at Pundit. You know, I'm a layman compared to these two, but yeah, we need to get out to a general audience. It needs to be off the business pages. That's exactly the point.
We'll take a break now, and actually we'll come back and we'll talk about the particularly gloomy warning. An extraordinary warning indeed from the man they called the world's greatest treasurer.